I paid for my daughter's wedding, but I wasn't even invited to the rehearsal dinner. I told myself it didn't matter, that a father doesn't keep score when it comes to his child. But the morning after the reception, the event coordinator called me. Her voice was shaking. She said the security system outside the bridal suite recorded something disturbing, something I needed to hear. And when I listened to that recording, I realized the most painful part of the wedding hadn't happened in front of everyone. It happened behind a closed door. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. I never imagined that the quietest phone call of my life would come the morning after my daughter's wedding. At first, the silence in my house felt peaceful. The wedding had been exhausting in ways I couldn't quite explain to anyone. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and something deeper inside me felt bruised. But I kept telling myself the same thing over and over. My daughter is happy. That's what matters. Her name is Emily. She's 32 years old now, but in my mind, I still see the little girl who used to run across the living room in socks, sliding on the hardwood floors while laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. I raised her mostly by myself after her mother and I divorced when Emily was 9. The divorce wasn't ugly, at least not in the way people expect. No screaming matches in courtrooms, no police calls, no broken dishes thrown against the wall. Just distance. Her mother moved to another state within a year, chasing a job opportunity that eventually became a new life. Emily stayed with me because she didn't want to leave her school, her friends, and the little yellow house we'd lived in since she was a baby. So it was the two of us. A single father who barely knew how to braid hair, and a little girl who pretended not to notice when I burned dinner. We learned together. I packed her lunches every morning before work. I sat through ballet recitals where I didn't understand anything except that she looked proud when she saw me in the audience. When she turned 16, I bought her a used Honda Civic and spent 3 weekends teaching her how to drive in an empty supermarket parking lot. When she left for college, I stood in her empty bedroom and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Parents are supposed to prepare for that moment, but nothing prepares you for the silence after your child leaves home. Emily did well for herself. She studied marketing, moved to Chicago, and eventually landed a job with a lifestyle branding company. It sounded fancy when she explained it, though half the time I didn't really understand what she actually did. But she was successful, confident, polished, the kind of woman people notice when she walks into a room. And about 2 years ago, she introduced me to the man she was going to marry, Daniel. I tried to like him from the beginning. I really did. He was tall, sharply dressed, and spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about money a single day in his life. His parents owned a chain of boutique hotels along the East Coast. His father was the kind of man who shook hands firmly, but somehow made you feel like you were being evaluated at the same time. His mother was even more intimidating. Graceful, perfect posture. The kind of woman who looked like she had stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive jewelry. When Emily introduced me to them at dinner, they were polite, but something about their smiles felt rehearsed, like actors performing a role. I ignored the feeling. Parents can be protective, and I figured they were probably just trying to understand who I was. A divorced man who ran a small construction supply business in Ohio. Not exactly the glamorous background they were used to. Still, when Emily told me about their wedding plans, I didn't hesitate. She said the venue was expensive, the kind of place people book 2 years in advance. An old lakeside estate with gardens, chandeliers, and a ballroom that could hold 200 guests. I told her I'd help pay, not because anyone asked, but because fathers do that kind of thing when their daughters get married. The truth is, it was more money than I should have spent, but I had savings, and this felt like one of those moments in life where money isn't the most important thing. Emily hugged me when I told her. "Dad, I don't have to," she said. I want to, I replied. And for a moment, she looked just like that little girl again, excited, grateful. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The first strange moment came when the rehearsal dinner invitations were sent out. I didn't receive one. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail, so I called Emily. She sounded uncomfortable almost immediately. "Oh, Dad, about that." There was a pause on the line that felt heavier than it should have been. "It's just a small dinner," she continued. "Daniel's parents wanted to keep it mostly to their side of the family." I remember sitting at my kitchen table while she explained this. My fingers were wrapped around a coffee mug that had already gone cold. "But I'm coming to the wedding," I said carefully. "Of course you are," she replied quickly. "You're walking me down the aisle." She said it like that settled everything, and maybe it should have. But something about being excluded from the rehearsal dinner, the night when families usually come together, felt strange. Still, I didn't argue. The last thing I wanted was to make Emily's wedding stressful. So I told her it was fine. And I meant it. At least, I thought I did. The wedding day itself was beautiful. The venue sat beside a lake that reflected the sunset like glass. Guests wandered through the gardens with champagne in their hands while a string quartet played softly near the fountain. Everything looked perfect. But if I'm honest, I felt like a guest at someone else's celebration. People introduced themselves politely. Some thanked me for helping make the wedding possible. But Daniel's parents mostly stayed in their circle of friends, and Emily seemed busy all evening, moving from table to table like a host trying to keep everything running smoothly. When it was time for the father-daughter dance, she held me tightly. For a moment, I forgot about everything else. All the awkwardness, all the distance. It was just the two of us again, like when she used to stand on my shoes while we danced in the living room when she was little. But the moment passed quickly. The music ended, the reception continued, and by the time I drove back to my hotel room that night, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Pride, exhaustion, and a faint ache I couldn't explain. The next morning I woke up early. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar. When I answered, a woman's voice spoke carefully. "Mr. Harris?" "Yes." "This is Laura Bennett. I'm the event coordinator from the wedding yesterday." For a second, I thought maybe there had been a billing mistake or something left behind. But then she hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice sounded different, uneasy. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm calling because something was recorded last night, near the bridal suite." I frowned slightly. "Recorded?" "Yes." Another pause, and then she said the words that made my chest tighten. "Our security system captured audio, and what we heard was disturbing, something I needed to hear." I stood there in the middle of my hotel room with the phone pressed against my ear, trying to understand what Laura Bennett had just said. The word disturbing has a strange way of echoing in your head when you don't know what it means yet. Disturbing could mean a lot of things. A fight? Someone drunk causing trouble? Maybe an accident? My mind started running through possibilities faster than I could stop it. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "I'm not sure I understand. What exactly was recorded?" On the other end of the line, Laura took a careful breath before answering. "There are security microphones near the hallway outside the bridal preparation rooms. They're mainly there in case of emergencies. Last night, around 40 minutes before the ceremony started, the system picked up a conversation outside the bridal suite." My stomach tightened. 40 minutes before the ceremony? That was around the time guests were already arriving, the musicians were tuning their instruments, and I was standing near the garden arch wondering if Emily was nervous. "Was someone arguing?" I asked. "In a way," Laura said quietly. "But the reason I'm calling you is because your name came up during that conversation. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared out the hotel window at the parking lot below. A few guests from the wedding were loading suitcases into their cars, laughing and hugging goodbye like the weekend had been perfect. "My name?" I finally repeated. "Yes, sir." She paused again, like someone choosing each word carefully. I debated for several hours whether I should even make this call, but after listening to the recording more than once, I felt you deserved to know what was said. My throat felt dry. "Can you just tell me what happened?" Instead of answering right away, Laura asked me something unexpected. "Mr. Harris, may I ask you something first?" "Of course. Did you pay for most of the wedding?" I blinked. "Yes," I said. "Why?" There was another long pause. Then she said something that made my heart sink even before I knew the full story. "Because that seemed to be a big part of the conversation." My chest felt heavy suddenly, like the air in the room had thickened. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" I asked quietly. Laura spoke gently, but there was a firmness in her voice now. "I can't explain it properly without letting you hear it yourself." "Hear what?" "The recording." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "You have the audio?" "Yes," she said, "and before I share it with anyone else, I thought you should have the chance to listen." My first instinct was hesitation. There's a strange fear that comes with knowing something painful might be waiting just on the other side of a decision. As long as you don't hear it, it isn't real yet. But another part of me knew I couldn't ignore this. "All right," I said. "Send it to me." She explained that she would email the file in a few minutes. Before hanging up, she added something that stayed with me. "Mr. Harris, I'm very sorry." When the call ended, the room felt impossibly quiet. I placed the phone on the bed beside me and rubbed my hands together slowly. I kept thinking about the rehearsal dinner, about Emily's uncomfortable tone when she told me I wasn't invited, about the way Daniel's parents had barely spoken to me during the reception. For months, I had pushed those feelings aside. I told myself I was being sensitive, that weddings are stressful and families don't always blend perfectly. But now, a stranger was calling to tell me something disturbing had been recorded, and my name was part of it. My phone buzzed softly beside me. The email had arrived. The subject line read simply, "Audio file wedding event 6:14 p.m." My finger hovered over the attachment. I realized my hands were shaking slightly. It's funny how a person can feel brave in big moments, but terrified by small ones. I took a breath and pressed play. At first, there was only the faint echo of footsteps in a hallway, then a door opening. A woman's voice spoke quietly. "Emily, honey, you need to calm down. Your makeup artist is waiting." It took me a second to recognize the voice, Daniel's mother. Then I heard Emily. My daughter sounded different than she had all weekend. Her voice was tight, shaky. "I know," she said. I need a minute." There was rustling, like someone pacing back and forth. "Guests are already arriving. This isn't the time for nerves." Emily's next words hit me like a punch to the chest. "It's not nerves. It's guilt." My heart started pounding harder. There was a brief silence in the recording before Daniel entered the conversation. "Guilt about what?" he asked, sounding impatient. Emily answered quietly, "About my dad." My hand tightened around the phone. Daniel gave a short laugh that sounded almost dismissive. "Emily, we've already been through this." Emily spoke again, and this time I heard tears in her voice. "He paid for most of this wedding, and he's sitting out there like a guest." Daniel responded immediately, "Because that's what he is." My stomach dropped. The conversation continued, every word landing harder than the last. Emily said, "He should have been part of the rehearsal dinner." Daniel sighed like someone tired of repeating themselves. My parents explained why that wouldn't work. Then Daniel's mother spoke again, her voice smooth but cold. "Emily, sweetheart, appearances matter at events like this." My chest tightened. Your father is a nice man, but he doesn't exactly fit the image our family is known for." The hallway fell silent for a few seconds. Then Emily said something so quietly I almost missed it. "He raised me alone." Daniel replied with a tone that made my jaw clench. "And he'll always have that story, but tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about us." I paused the recording there. I couldn't breathe properly. The room felt smaller somehow. But the worst part wasn't even what they had said. It was the realization that my daughter had been standing there listening to them talk about me like that on the day she was supposed to marry into their family. And the recording still had several minutes left. I stared at the paused recording on my phone for what felt like a long time. The little progress bar showed there were still a few minutes left, but my finger hovered above the screen like it suddenly weighed 10 pounds. In that moment, I understood something about pain I hadn't fully realized before. Sometimes the worst part isn't hearing something hurtful. It's knowing there's more of it waiting for you. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and rubbed my face with both hands. My daughter's voice from a few seconds earlier kept echoing in my head. "He raised me alone." She had said it so quietly, but I heard it clearly. For a moment, that single sentence gave me a strange sense of comfort. It meant she hadn't forgotten. All those years, all those sacrifices. Somewhere inside her, she still remembered. But then Daniel's voice had cut through that moment like a blade. "Tonight is about us." I took a slow breath and pressed play again. The recording resumed with the faint sound of fabric rustling, like someone adjusting their dress. Then Emily spoke again, her voice still trembling slightly. "I just feel like I betrayed him," she said. Daniel let out a tired exhale. "Emily, this conversation again?" he said. "We talked about it for weeks." "Talking about it doesn't make it feel right," she replied. There was another pause. Then Daniel's mother spoke again, her voice calm in that same polished way. "Sweetheart, families sometimes have complicated backgrounds. Weddings are about presenting the best version of your life moving forward." I felt my jaw tighten. Emily didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was softer. "My dad is part of my life moving forward." There was silence for a moment. I almost smiled when I heard that. But the silence didn't last long. Daniel chuckled under his breath, not loudly, but enough that the microphone picked it up. "Emily, nobody said he isn't part of your life," he said. "We just didn't need him involved in everything." Then his tone shifted slightly, becoming more direct. "Look, my parents already compromised by letting him pay for half the event." Half. I almost laughed bitterly when I heard that. I had paid for almost 70% of the entire wedding. The venue, the catering deposit, the band, the floral arrangements. Emily had insisted on certain things she loved, and every time the budget stretched further, I told her the same words. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It's your day." But hearing Daniel say it like that, like it was some kind of charity from their side, made my chest ache. Emily must have felt the tension too, because she responded quickly. "He didn't pay his part, Daniel. He offered to help because he loves me." Daniel sighed again, the way someone does when they feel a conversation going in circles. "I'm not saying he doesn't love you," he said, "but my parents have a reputation. This wedding has guests from their business network, investors, hotel partners, people who expect a certain level of presentation." His mother chimed in again before Emily could reply. "It's not about your father personally," she said smoothly. "It's about maintaining a certain atmosphere." My stomach twisted. I could practically picture her standing there in that hallway, one hand probably resting lightly on Emily's arm, speaking gently while saying something incredibly cruel. Emily spoke again, and this time the hurt in her voice was unmistakable. "You're talking about him like he's an embarrassment." Daniel answered quickly. "Nobody said that." Emily's voice rose slightly. "You didn't have to say it." The recording crackled softly for a moment as someone moved closer to the microphone. Then Daniel lowered his voice, but it still came through clearly. "Emily, listen to me. Your father is a construction supplier from Ohio. My parents host international business conferences. Their friends fly private jets." He paused. "These worlds don't exactly blend." I closed my eyes for a second when I heard that. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I had quietly suspected from the first dinner we shared. To them, I wasn't just different, I was beneath them. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts again. "You're making it sound like he's some kind of problem that needs to be managed." Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone had changed. It wasn't patient anymore. It was blunt. "He's not a problem. He's just not the story we're telling tonight." Those words hung in the hallway for several seconds. Even through the recording, I could feel the weight of them. Emily whispered something next, but it was so soft I had to lean closer to the phone to hear it. "He's my story." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel's mother said something that made my chest tighten again. "Emily, dear, once the ceremony begins, none of this will matter anymore. People will remember the beautiful venue, the elegant reception, the photographs, not who attended which dinner." She paused before adding quietly, "Your father will still walk you down the aisle. That should be more than enough for him." More than enough. I stared at the phone as the recording continued. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping it until my knuckles started to ache. The conversation shifted again after that. Emily sounded exhausted. "I don't want to fight about this today." Daniel's tone softened slightly, as if he sensed the moment was slipping away. "You're not fighting," he said. "You're getting married." Then he added something that made my stomach drop again. "And tomorrow, none of this will even matter. Your dad will go back to Ohio, we'll start our life in Chicago, and everyone will move on." My finger hovered over the screen again, but this time I didn't pause it. I let the recording keep playing, because something in Daniel's voice told me the worst part hadn't happened yet. The recording continued, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, as if being physically closer to the phone would somehow soften the blow of whatever came next. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I could hear faint movement in the hallway, fabric brushing against the wall, a door creaking open somewhere down the corridor, distant voices from the venue staff preparing for the ceremony. Then Emily spoke again. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "I just don't want him to feel like he's being used," she said. The words sat there for a moment, hanging in the air. Daniel responded almost immediately, but his tone was careful now, the way someone speaks when they think they're explaining something obvious. "Emily, nobody is using him." Another pause. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "He offered to help with the wedding. We didn't force him." His mother let out a quiet sigh, the kind that carries both patience and irritation at the same time. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "your father insisted on contributing financially. It would have been rude to refuse." Even through the recording, I could hear Emily shifting her weight, pacing again. "But that's not the same thing," she replied. "He thinks he's helping create this day with us." Daniel chuckled softly, not loudly, not cruelly, just casually, and somehow that made it worse. "Well," he said, "technically he is." I felt something heavy settle in my chest, because I suddenly understood the difference between what Emily believed and what they believed. To Emily, I was part of the wedding. To them, I had simply been a funding source. Emily spoke again, her voice tightening. "That's not funny." Daniel exhaled slowly, like someone losing patience. Emily, look, he already explained this situation months ago. You knew how things needed to be handled. The word handled echoed in my mind. Handled, like I was some kind of logistical detail instead of a person. Emily didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, there was frustration in her voice. I didn't know it meant leaving him out of everything. Daniel's mother stepped in again, her voice calm but firm. You're not leaving him out of everything. He's attending the ceremony. He's attending the reception. He's walking you down the aisle. Then she added something that felt like a quiet knife sliding between ribs. Many fathers would consider that an honor. I stared at the phone in disbelief. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Emily said something that surprised me. You didn't even want him giving a speech. The hallway went silent. I could practically feel the tension through the audio. Daniel answered after a few seconds. That was a practical decision. Practical? Emily repeated. Yes, he said. The speeches are already scheduled. My father, my best man, and you. Emily sounded stunned. You didn't think my dad should say something at my wedding? Daniel hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. When he finally spoke again, his voice had hardened slightly. Emily, your father isn't exactly comfortable speaking in front of large crowds. My jaw tightened. I'd given presentations to rooms full of contractors and suppliers for 25 years. Public speaking wasn't the problem, but Emily answered before I could finish that thought. He gave a speech at my college graduation party. You were there. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, his mother spoke again. This is becoming unnecessarily emotional, she said. The ceremony begins in less than an hour. Emily needs to focus. Emily let out a shaky breath. You keep saying that. Because it's true, Daniel replied. Then he said something that made my heart sink deeper than anything else I had heard so far. Look, the truth is, if your dad hadn't offered to help financially, my parents would have handled the entire event themselves. The hallway went completely silent. I could hear the faint hum of the venue's ventilation system in the background. Then Emily asked quietly, What does that have to do with anything? Daniel answered without hesitation. It means everyone got what they needed. My chest tightened. Emily sounded confused now. What do you mean? Daniel spoke slowly, as if explaining something obvious. Your dad got to feel like he was contributing to something important. He paused. My parents got the wedding they wanted. Another pause. And we get to start our life without any awkward financial obligations hanging over us. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Emily whispered something so soft it almost didn't register. That sounds horrible. Daniel let out a small laugh again. Emily, you're overthinking this. Her voice rose slightly. No, I'm not. Daniel sighed. Look, he's not poor. He runs a business. He had the money. That's not the point, Emily said. Then what is the point? Daniel replied, sounding genuinely confused. And that was the moment the recording changed. Emily stopped pacing. Her voice steadied in a way I hadn't heard before. The point, she said quietly, is that he spent 20 years putting me first. No one interrupted her this time. He skipped vacations so I could go on school trips. He worked weekends so I could take dance classes. When I needed money for college, he sold his fishing boat. I swallowed hard when I heard that. I hadn't realized she remembered the boat. Emily continued, and now you're standing here telling me it's convenient that he paid for my wedding, but inconvenient for him to be visible at it. Her words echoed down the hallway. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "You're twisting things." "No," Emily said. "I'm finally saying them out loud." For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt all morning. Hope. Because my daughter wasn't staying silent. She was standing up. But then Daniel said something that made that hope flicker uncertainly. "Emily," he said slowly, "if this is how you feel, why didn't you say something months ago?" The hallway went still again, and when Emily answered, her voice carried a kind of exhaustion that made my chest ache. "Because I thought I could make everyone happy." When Emily said those words, "because I thought I could make everyone happy," the hallway and the recording fell into a long, heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone finally says the truth out loud and no one knows how to respond to it. I sat motionless on the edge of the hotel bed, listening. Even through a tiny phone speaker, I could feel the tension sitting in that hallway like a storm cloud waiting to break. Daniel was the first to speak again. His voice had changed slightly, not softer, but more careful. "Emily," he said slowly, "marriage isn't about making everyone happy. It's about building a life together." She didn't answer right away. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "I know that." Daniel sighed. "Then why are we even having this conversation?" Another long pause. When Emily finally spoke, there was something fragile in her voice. "Because I feel like I've already started this marriage by hurting the person who has loved me the longest." I closed my eyes when I heard that. There's something strange about hearing your child talk about you when they don't know you're listening. It's like seeing a reflection of yourself through someone else's eyes. Daniel didn't respond immediately, but his mother did. Her tone was still polished, but there was a sharper edge underneath now. "Emily, sweetheart," she said, "guilt can make people see things in ways that aren't accurate." Emily sounded tired. "What part isn't accurate?" "You're not hurting your father," the woman replied calmly. "You're simply starting a new chapter of your life." The words were delivered so smoothly they almost sounded reasonable. Almost. But Emily didn't seem convinced. "He looked confused when I told him about the rehearsal dinner," she said quietly. My heart dropped again because I remembered that phone call. I had tried so hard to sound normal, to sound understanding. Apparently, I hadn't succeeded as well as I thought. Daniel spoke again. "Emily, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." "How?" she asked. "He's still here. He's still part of the ceremony. He'll still get his moment walking you down the aisle." Moment. The way he said that word made it sound like a performance slot on a schedule. Emily didn't answer, but after a few seconds, Daniel continued. "Honestly, most fathers would be thrilled just to be included at all." I felt my jaw tighten because I suddenly realized something. To Daniel, I wasn't a father. I was a logistical detail in the wedding program. Emily's voice cut through the tension again. "You keep talking about him like he's some kind of obligation." Daniel sounded frustrated now. "That's not what I'm doing." "Yes, it is," she replied. His mother stepped in again before the conversation could escalate. "Emily, dear, emotions are running high right now. That's normal before a wedding." Then she added something that made my stomach twist. "But once you walk down that aisle, you'll understand that your priorities have changed." Emily asked quietly, "Changed how?" "In marriage," the woman said calmly, "your husband becomes your primary family." I could practically hear Emily turning toward her when she responded, "My dad is still my family." "Of course he is," the woman said quickly, but then she added something that carried a quiet finality. "Just not in the same way." Another silence settled over the hallway. This one felt different, heavier. And then something unexpected happened. Emily laughed. Not happily, not even bitterly, just tired. "You know what's strange?" she said. No one answered, so she continued. "My dad never once told me I had to choose between him and anyone else." I swallowed hard. Daniel's voice came back, slightly defensive. "Nobody's asking you to choose." Emily responded immediately. "Then how does it feel like I already did?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel said something that changed the entire direction of the conversation. "Emily, are you actually reconsidering this wedding right now?" My heart skipped. The question hung in the air like a spark near gasoline. Emily sounded shocked. "No, of course not." Daniel let out a small breath as if relieved. "Then I don't understand what the problem is." Emily answered quietly. "The problem is that I'm standing here realizing something about the man I'm about to marry." Daniel's tone sharpened. "And in what exactly is that supposed to mean?" She didn't hesitate. "It means you're perfectly comfortable benefiting from my father's generosity while pretending he doesn't belong in the same room as your family." The words landed hard, even through a recording. Daniel didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice was colder. "That's not fair." Emily replied calmly, "It's exactly fair." Then Daniel said something that made my stomach drop again. "If your father didn't want to feel awkward, he shouldn't have insisted on paying for things." I stared at the phone because I suddenly realized something horrifying. Daniel genuinely believed that. Emily sounded stunned. "Insisted?" "Yes," he said. "He offered." "And you accepted," she replied. "That's how offers work," Daniel said flatly. For a few seconds, no one spoke again. Then Emily whispered something that made my chest ache. "You know what the worst part is?" Daniel asked impatiently. "What?" Her voice trembled slightly. "The worst part is that he probably still thinks he helped give me the perfect wedding." I pressed the phone closer to my ear because something in her voice told me she wasn't finished, and the recording still had nearly a full minute left. The recording continued, and I felt my chest tighten as Emily's last words echoed through the quiet hallway. "The worst part is that he probably still thinks he helped give me the perfect wedding." For several seconds, nobody responded. I could hear a faint creak in the background, like someone shifting their weight against the wall. Then Daniel spoke again. His voice had changed. It wasn't impatient this time. It sounded irritated. "Emily," he said slowly, "you're acting like we committed some terrible crime." She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than before. "You didn't commit a crime," she said. "You just made my father feel small." Daniel exhaled sharply. "That's not what happened." Emily responded immediately. "Then what did happen?" There was a pause long enough that I wondered if Daniel had stepped away from the hallway. But then his voice came back, firm and slightly defensive. "What happened is that your dad offered to help pay for a wedding that my family could easily afford." I felt something twist inside my stomach. Emily spoke again. "That's not the point." Daniel ignored her. "And now you're acting like we took advantage of him," he continued. Another pause. "Which is honestly insulting." Emily sounded incredulous. "Insulting to who?" "To my parents," Daniel said. I almost laughed bitterly when I heard that, but Emily beat me to it. "To your parents?" she repeated. "Yes." "How exactly are they the victims in this situation?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried that same cold logic he had used earlier. "Because they've been nothing but welcoming to your father." Emily's response came instantly. "Welcoming?" There was a pause. Then she said something that made my throat tighten. You didn't even want him at the rehearsal dinner." Daniel's mother spoke again before Daniel could respond. Her tone was calm, but the patience in her voice was clearly running thin. "Emily, we already explained that decision." "You explained it. I just don't think it was right." Daniel's voice sharpened. "This conversation is pointless." "Maybe," Emily said, "but it's also honest." The hallway went quiet again. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel laughed. It wasn't the casual chuckle from earlier. It sounded harsher this time. "Emily, you're about to marry into a family that operates in a completely different social world than the one you grew up in." My jaw clenched, but Emily didn't interrupt him. "And part of being in that world," he continued, "is understanding how appearances work." She answered quietly, "So my dad is bad for appearances?" Daniel hesitated, but not long enough. "He's different," he said. Different. That word felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Emily's voice came back sharper now. "You mean he's not wealthy?" Daniel didn't deny it. "My parents' business partners expect a certain level of sophistication at events like this." Emily asked something that made the hallway go silent again. "And my father doesn't qualify?" Daniel sighed. "Emily, don't twist my words." But she kept going. "He worked 60 hours a week for 20 years. I'm not questioning his work ethic. He paid for my college." "That's great. He paid for this wedding." "Yes, he did," Daniel said flatly. "And yet somehow he's still not good enough to sit at dinner with your family." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel's mother said something quietly. "Emily, dear, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment." Emily laughed softly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "No, it's convenient." Daniel spoke again, his voice tight now. "Emily, we're done discussing this." She didn't back down. "No, we're not." The tension in the hallway became almost physical. Even through the recording, I could feel it. Then Daniel said something that made my stomach drop. "Well," Daniel said quietly, "it's a good thing he'll never hear it." And at that moment, the recording ended. The recording stopped so suddenly that for a moment I thought my phone had malfunctioned. But when I looked down at the screen, the progress bar had reached the end. There was nothing else, just silence. I sat there on the edge of the hotel bed, holding the phone in my hand while everything I had just heard slowly settled into place in my mind. Daniel's last words kept echoing over and over. "Well, it's a good thing he'll never hear it." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The room around me felt strangely distant, like I was sitting inside a memory instead of real life. Outside the window, the morning sun had climbed higher. A few wedding guests were still leaving the hotel parking lot, their laughter drifting faintly through the glass. To them, the weekend had probably been beautiful. A perfect ceremony, a perfect reception, a perfect ending. But I knew something they didn't. Behind that perfect wedding, there had been a hallway conversation full of doubt, guilt, pride, and something darker. And now I was the only person who knew it happened. My phone buzzed softly in my hand. Another message from Laura Bennett. "Mr. Harris, I just wanted to check in and make sure you received the audio file. I'm very sorry again for what you had to hear." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "I received it. Thank you for telling me." 3 little dots appeared on the screen as she began typing. Then another message arrived. I wasn't sure whether it was my place to share it, but after hearing the way they spoke about you, it didn't feel right keeping it to myself. I leaned back slowly against the headboard. For a long time, I didn't answer. Because I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I felt tired. tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Eventually, I typed back, "You did the right thing." Her reply came quickly. "Are you going to tell your daughter?" I stared at that question because the truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to call Emily immediately to ask her why she hadn't told me any of this, to ask why she let those people talk about me like that. But another part of me kept replaying something she had said during the recording. He raised me alone. She hadn't said it defensively. She hadn't said it to win the argument. She had said it like a quiet truth she was holding on to. I typed another message to Laura. Did anyone else hear the recording? A moment passed before her reply arrived. No, only me. That surprised me. Why? Her response came slowly. Because I deleted it from the venue system after I saved a copy. I blinked at the screen. You deleted it? Yes. Another pause. Then she added something that made me sit up a little straighter. Some things shouldn't become gossip. I thought about that for a moment. A wedding venue hears a lot of things, I imagined. Arguments, confessions, secrets whispered in hallways. But Laura had chosen not to share this one. Instead, she had called the man who was being talked about. I typed back a simple message. Thank you. After that, the conversation ended, and the room fell quiet again. I set my phone down on the bed and walked slowly over to the window. The parking lot was almost empty now. Most of the guests had already left. The wedding was over. Emily and Daniel were probably waking up somewhere else, maybe at the bridal suite in the estate house, or maybe already on their way to the honeymoon. I wondered if she remembered the conversation in that hallway, or if the rush of the ceremony and reception had buried it beneath champagne glasses and dancing. Then something else crossed my mind. I had only heard what happened before the ceremony, but I had also been there during the ceremony. I remembered how Emily's hands trembled slightly when she took my arm, how she looked at me just before we started walking down the aisle. At the time, I assumed it was normal wedding nerves. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe she was still thinking about that conversation. Maybe she had been carrying the weight of it all the way down the aisle. I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered that walk. The music had started softly. Everyone had stood. Emily had taken my arm, and just before the doors opened, she had whispered something. At the time, it seemed like a simple comment, but now, remembering it after hearing the recording, the words felt different. She had said, "Dad, thank you for everything." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "Always," I told her. But now I wondered if she meant more than I realized. My phone buzzed again on the bed. This time, it was a different name on the screen. Emily. For a moment, I simply stared at it. My heart thumped quietly in my chest. Eventually, I picked up the phone and answered. "Hello?" Her voice came through the speaker, warm but slightly tired. "Hey, Dad." "Morning, sweetheart." There was a brief pause on the line. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "I was just thinking about you." I forced a small smile, even though she couldn't see it. "That's funny," I said. "I was thinking about you too." She laughed softly. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" I glanced around the quiet hotel room. "Proud," I said honestly. "You looked beautiful." Another pause. Then her voice softened. "Thank you." For a moment, neither of us spoke, and then she asked the question I had been wondering about since the recording ended. "Did you get home yet?" I looked at the suitcase sitting half-packed near the door. "Not yet. I'm still at the hotel." "Oh," she replied. "Are you leaving soon?" I hesitated because suddenly I realized something. I had the recording, I had the truth, and my daughter was on the other end of the phone, but I still hadn't decided what to do with it. I held the phone against my ear while Emily waited for my answer. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll probably check out in a little while." "That makes sense," she replied softly. Her voice sounded normal, maybe a little tired from the wedding, but otherwise the same as it always had been, which somehow made everything harder, because now I knew about the conversation in the hallway, and she didn't know that I knew. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked something that caught me slightly off guard. "Did you enjoy the reception?" I looked out the hotel window again. The lake from the wedding venue was visible in the distance, shining under the morning sun. "It was beautiful," I said honestly. "You and Daniel put together quite a celebration." She let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like relief. "I'm glad you liked it." Another pause settled between us. Normally, our conversations flowed easily, but this morning felt different, like there were invisible walls around every sentence. Finally, Emily spoke again. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Her voice hesitated. "You didn't feel uncomfortable yesterday, did you?" My grip tightened slightly around the phone. The question was gentle, but I suddenly realized how carefully she had chosen the word uncomfortable. I took a moment before answering. "No," I said slowly. "Why would you ask that?" She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I don't know." Another pause. "I just kept wondering if everything felt okay for you." I closed my eyes briefly because I could hear the worry in her voice, and part of me understood exactly where it was coming from, but I still didn't know if telling her the truth would help anything or just make things worse. So I answered the only way I could in that moment. I was happy to be there. And that part wasn't a lie. She let out another small breath. "Good," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." The silence that followed felt heavier this time. Then Emily said something unexpected. "Daniel and I are leaving for the airport in a few hours." "Honeymoon already?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Yeah, his parents insisted we take the flight this morning." "Where are you going?" "Italy." "Well," I said gently, "that sounds wonderful." Another pause. Then her voice shifted slightly. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Thank you again for helping make the wedding possible." The words hit me differently now than they would have 24 hours earlier, because I couldn't stop hearing Daniel's voice layered over them. He offered to help, and we accepted, but I pushed that thought away. "You're my daughter," I said simply. "You don't have to thank me for that." She didn't answer right away, and then she said something that made my chest tighten again. "I know." Her voice softened further. "You've always taken care of me." For a moment, I thought she might say something else, but she didn't. Instead, she changed the subject. "Are you heading straight back to Ohio?" "Probably," I replied, "unless I stop for lunch somewhere on the way." "That's a long drive," she said. "I've done it before." She laughed faintly. "Yeah, you've done a lot of things before." There was another pause, and then she said something that caught me completely by surprise. "Dad, can I ask you one more question?" "Sure." Her voice was hesitant now. "When you told me about the rehearsal dinner, you sounded like it didn't bother you." My stomach tightened again. "But did it?" The question hung between us. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, about the phone call from Laura, about the recording, about the conversation in the hallway. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Emily had defended me in that recording, Or maybe it was just the realization that she had already been struggling with this long before I ever heard about it. So I answered carefully. It surprised me a little, I admitted. Her voice dropped. I'm sorry about that. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do, she said quietly. I should have handled that better. I sat down slowly in the chair by the window. Emily? Yeah? You had a lot going on with the wedding. That's not an excuse, she replied. I didn't answer right away. Then I said something that came from a place deeper than logic. You were trying to make everyone happy. The line went silent. For a full 3 seconds, Emily didn't speak. Then she asked something slowly. Why did you say that? My heart skipped because I hadn't realized the words had slipped out so naturally, the exact words she had used in the hallway recording. I quickly tried to recover. Well, that's what weddings do. They put people in the middle of a lot of expectations. She didn't sound convinced. Maybe, she said. Then she added something quietly. But sometimes trying to make everyone happy just means somebody gets hurt. I swallowed. Sometimes, I agreed. Another silence passed. Then Emily's voice softened again. Dad? Yes? If you ever feel like I hurt you, I want you to tell me. I looked out at the sunlight reflecting off the lake again. You didn't hurt me, I said. And in a strange way, that was mostly true, because the person who hurt me the most yesterday wasn't my daughter. It was the man she had married. Emily spoke again. Okay. Her voice sounded calmer now. I should probably go. Daniel's family is downstairs already. All right, I said. And Dad? Yes? I love you. I smiled faintly. I love you too, sweetheart. The call ended a moment later, and I sat there in the quiet room holding my phone, realizing something important. My daughter had married a man who believed I would never hear that hallway conversation, and technically, he was right, because I still hadn't decided if he ever would. After the call with Emily ended, I sat in the quiet hotel room for a long time without moving. The sunlight had shifted across the floor, stretching toward the door as the morning turned slowly into late morning. Somewhere down the hallway, a housekeeping cart rattled past, and someone laughed faintly near the elevators. Life outside the room continued like normal, but inside my head, that hallway recording kept replaying. Daniel's voice. His mother's calm explanations. Emily trying to defend me while also trying not to start a war right before her wedding. And one sentence that kept circling back over and over again. Well, it's a good thing he'll never hear it. I stood up slowly and walked over to the small desk near the television. My laptop sat there, still closed. Next to it was the printed wedding schedule the venue had placed in each guest's room. Ceremony, 6:30 p.m. Reception, 7:30 p.m. First dance, 8:10 p.m. Father-daughter dance, 8:45 p.m. I stared at that last line. Father-daughter dance. The music had been soft, something slow and sentimental that Emily had chosen. When the DJ called us to the dance floor, the guests had gathered around in a circle, everyone smiling, phones out, recording the moment. Emily had wrapped her arms around me and rested her head against me for a few seconds before the dancing started. At the time, I had assumed she was just emotional. Now I wondered if she had still been carrying the weight of that hallway argument. Maybe she had needed that moment with me more than I realized. I picked up my phone from the desk and stared at the audio file again. The recording was only 6 minutes long. 6 minutes that had changed the way I saw the entire wedding. 6 minutes that Daniel believed I would never hear. For a moment, I considered deleting it, just erasing the whole thing and pretending the phone call from Laura had never happened. Life would certainly be easier that way. Emily would go on her honeymoon, she would come back to Chicago and start her married life, and eventually the memory of the wedding would settle into something simple and pleasant. But the more I thought about deleting the file, the more something inside me resisted. Because the truth is, the recording wasn't just about what Daniel had said. It was about what Emily had said too, about the way she defended me, about the way she remembered the sacrifices I had made, about the guilt she had clearly been carrying. Deleting the recording felt like erasing that part of the story too. I sighed and slipped the phone into my pocket. Then I finished packing my suitcase. 20 minutes later, I checked out of the hotel and walked across the parking lot toward my car. The air outside was cool and fresh. A few birds circled above the lake in the distance. For a moment, everything felt strangely peaceful. I placed my suitcase in the trunk and slid into the driver's seat. The engine started with a quiet rumble, but instead of pulling out of the parking lot right away, I just sat there, because something else had been circling my thoughts since the recording ended, something Laura had said in her last message. Some things shouldn't become gossip. She had deleted the recording from the venue system, which meant the only copy left was the one she had sent to me. That gave me a kind of power I hadn't expected, not in a power in a revenge sense, but power over the future of that moment. I could keep it private, or I could share it. I could tell Emily, or I could tell Daniel, or I could simply carry the knowledge quietly for the rest of my life. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be Emily calling back, but when I pulled it out, the name on the screen was different. Laura Bennett. I answered after the second ring. Hello? Mr. Harris? Yes? I just wanted to check on you. I smiled faintly. That's very kind of you. She hesitated. Did you talk to your daughter? Yes, I said. And? I leaned back in the driver's seat and looked out across the lake. She's leaving for her honeymoon. Laura was quiet for a moment. Did you tell her about the recording? No. Another pause. Do you think you will? I thought about Emily's voice earlier that morning. If you ever feel like I hurt you, I want you to tell me. But I also remembered something else. The moment before we walked down the aisle, the way she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything." I don't know yet, I said honestly. Laura spoke carefully. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but when I listened to that recording, I didn't hear a daughter who didn't love her father. Neither did I. I heard someone stuck between two worlds. That description felt painfully accurate. After a moment, she added something else. And sometimes people say terrible things when they're trying to protect a life they think they're supposed to have. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. That sounds about right. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Laura asked one final question. What do you think you'll do now? I looked out at the open road leading away from the hotel. The future stretched out in front of me, uncertain but quiet. I think I'm going to go home, I said slowly. And the recording? I reached into my pocket and held the phone again. 6 minutes. 6 minutes that could change everything. I'll keep it, for now. Laura's voice softened. That sounds wise. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is choose when not to use the truth as a weapon. The line went silent. I sat there for another minute, thinking about those words. Then I placed the phone back in my pocket, put the car into gear, and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. But as I drove toward the highway, I had no idea that the recording I had chosen to keep would come back into my life much sooner than I expected. Because 3 weeks later, Emily would call me again, and this time, she would be crying. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Emily again. Life returned to its usual rhythm during that time. I went back to work at the supply yard. I met with contractors, signed invoices, and spent my afternoons walking the aisles of stacked lumber and steel fasteners like I had done for the past 25 years. On the outside, nothing had changed. But every now and then, when the office got quiet, I would remember the recording, Daniel's voice, Emily defending me, that strange conversation in the hallway before the ceremony. The file stayed on my phone. I never listened to it again, but I never deleted it either. Then one evening, just after 6 o'clock, my phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Hey, sweetheart." But instead of the cheerful voice I expected, I heard something else, a sharp breath, like someone trying to hold back tears. "Dad?" My chest tightened. "What's wrong?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then the words came out in a rush. "I think I made a mistake." I leaned forward slowly in my chair. "What happened?" There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Daniel and I had a fight." That didn't surprise me. Newly married couples argue sometimes, but the way she sounded told me this was something deeper. "What kind of fight?" I asked gently. Another breath. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "It was about you." I closed my eyes briefly. "What about me?" Her voice trembled. "We were talking about the wedding, and I told him I still felt bad about how everything happened with the rehearsal dinner." I listened quietly. "And he got angry," she continued. "Angry how?" "He said I was embarrassing him by bringing it up again." That sounded exactly like the tone I had heard in the hallway recording, but I stayed silent. Emily kept talking. "He said I needed to stop acting like my family background was something to apologize for." My chest tightened. "And then he said something else." Her voice cracked. "He said my father should have been grateful just to be included in the wedding." For a moment, I couldn't speak, not because the comment shocked me, but because I had already heard Daniel say something very similar 3 weeks earlier. Emily sniffed quietly. "I don't think he understands you at all." I took a slow breath. Maybe he just sees the world differently. "That's the problem," she said softly. There was a long silence between us. Then she asked something unexpected. "Dad, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "Did anything about the wedding make you feel small?" The question hung in the air. 3 weeks ago, I might have denied it instantly, but now things were different because Emily was asking as someone who already suspected the answer. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. The sun was setting over the trees behind my house. "You remember when you were 10 years old?" I said gently. She sounded confused. "What?" "You had that school play where you played a sunflower." She laughed weakly through her tears. "Oh my God, yes." "You were nervous before going on stage," I continued. "And do you remember what I told you?" Another pause. Then she answered softly. You said the only thing that mattered was that I tried my best. That's right. I let the memory settle for a moment. Emily, life is full of moments where people make us feel smaller than we really are. She didn't speak. But the trick, I continued, is remembering who you are anyway. Her voice came back quiet and thoughtful. You're avoiding the question. I smiled faintly. Maybe. She took a breath. Dad, please. So I told her the truth. Yes, I said. There were a few moments where I felt out of place. The line went silent. Then she whispered, I knew it. But that's not your fault, I said quickly. It feels like it is. It isn't. She sniffed again. I just keep thinking about how hard you worked for me growing up. You don't owe me anything for that. I do, she said softly. No, I replied. That was my job, my privilege. Another silence passed. Then Emily said something that made my chest tighten. Sometimes I think Daniel and I grew up in completely different universes. That can happen. But I don't know if I noticed how different until now. Her voice carried a kind of clarity I hadn't heard before. Dad? Yes? If someone ever made you feel like you didn't belong somewhere, why didn't you say something? I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly, because sometimes speaking up creates a bigger wound than staying quiet. Emily didn't reply right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It sounded stronger. Maybe, she said slowly, but sometimes silence lets the wrong people believe they're right. I sat there absorbing those words because she wasn't the uncertain bride from the hallway recording anymore. She sounded like someone who had started seeing things clearly. Dad? Yes? I want to visit next weekend. You're always welcome here. I know, but this time I think I need to talk to you face to face. About Daniel? About everything. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I'll make your favorite pancakes. She laughed softly. You always say that. And I always mean it. The tension in her voice finally eased. Thanks, Dad. For what? For never making me feel like I had to choose between you and the rest of my life. My throat tightened slightly. That's because you never had to. We said goodnight a few minutes later. After the call ended, I sat quietly in the fading light. The recording was still on my phone, still untouched, still carrying those 6 minutes of truth from the hallway before the wedding. But for the first time since hearing it, I felt something different. Peace. Because the truth had a strange way of revealing itself eventually, even without a recording. 3 weeks ago, Daniel believed I would never hear that conversation, and technically, he was still right, because the most important part of the story wasn't what he said, it was what my daughter had finally understood. And sometimes, that understanding is the real ending a parent hopes for. Not revenge, not confrontation, just the quiet moment when your child grows strong enough to see the world clearly and remembers who stood beside them from the very beginning.